A line is a one-dimensional figure which has length but no width. A line is made up of a set of points which is extended in opposite directions infinitely. It is determined by 2 points in a two-dimensional plane. In geometry, there are different types of lines such as horizontal and vertical lines, parallel and perpendicular lines. These lines plays an important role in the constructing of different types of polygons. But now, the lines that we are going to tackle is the parallel line and the perpendicular lines. Good day everyone, I am Melka Pierginti and I am one of the group member who are going to report the parallel and perpendicular lines. After these lessons, pupils are expected to determine the parallel lines from perpendicular lines, determine perpendicular lines from parallel lines. Next is identify real-life objects of parallel and perpendicular lines, and lastly, contrast parallel lines from perpendicular lines. Now, what is parallel and perpendicular lines? Parallel and perpendicular lines are an important part of geometry and they have distinct characteristics that help to identify them easily. First is the parallel line. Parallel line is two straight lines lie in the same plane. Another is never intersect each other and always the same distance apart and are equidistant lines. Symbol used to present parallel lines is shown below. Next is the characteristics of perpendicular lines. Perpendicular lines are two lines that intersect each other at an angle of 90 degrees. And the perpendicular lines are denoted by the symbol shown below. Now, let's move on to the properties of parallel lines. Parallel lines are always equidistant from each other and they never meet at any common point. They lie in the same plane. So, I have here an example of parallel line. The red line and the blue line are parallel in both of these examples. Lines are parallel if they are always in the same distance apart. That's what we call equidistance and will never meet. They also point in the same direction, always the same distance apart and never touching. That is how to identify parallel lines. Now let's proceed to the properties of perpendicular lines. Perpendicular lines always intersect at 90 degrees and all perpendicular lines can be termed as intersecting lines, but all intersecting lines cannot be called perpendicular because they need to intersect at right angles. So I have here an example of a perpendicular line. So line AB is perpendicular to line CD. Why? Because they intersect at the right angle measuring the 90 degree. That's why we call perpendicular lines. The two lines must cross at right angles to each other just to be called perpendicular lines. Always remember that all intersecting lines cannot be called perpendicular lines, but perpendicular lines can be termed as intersecting lines. Now, let's differentiate the difference between the parallel and perpendicular lines. Although parallel and perpendicular lines are the two basic and most commonly used lines in geometry, they are quite different from each other. The following table shows the difference between parallel and perpendicular lines. For parallel lines are those that never intersect and are always the same distance apart, while perpendicular lines are those that always intersect each other at right angles. Next is the symbol of the parallel lines is different from the perpendicular lines. The example of parallel lines are the railway tracks, the opposite sides of a whiteboard. Whereas the example of perpendicular lines are the letter L, because as you can see, letter L have they intersect at the right angle. Another is the joining walls of your classroom or your house.